When I first got into language learning, I assumed that it was like any other subject you learn in school. You move through a list of lessons, you check off topics, and eventually you're done. You're fluent. But after almost 1,000 hours of Spanish, after being able to have natural, fluent conversations with native speakers, I've really changed my opinion on what I think fluency really is. And I think most people's idea of what fluency is completely misses the point. And if your goal is to become fluent in a language, but you can't really define fluency well, then how can you reach fluency? It seems to me that most people think that fluency is equivalent with some form of completion. Like after you know this many words, after you're able to understand this many sentence structures, you're fluent. But language learning is so much more about context and inference than people realize. It's not about knowing a certain amount of words or knowing a certain amount of sentence structures. It's about, at its core, understanding people. And I know to a lot of people, those might sound like the same thing. You understand enough words, you understand enough sentence structures, you understand people. But as I've gotten further in language learning, I really don't think that's true. I don't think knowing specific words and specific rules and specific phrases is the same thing as being able to naturally understand someone talking to you. Because every single person you'll encounter will put their own little spin on the language. Nobody asks the same question or expresses the same sentiment exactly the same way. And I want to give you an example of that in English. In English, I could say, I don't really feel like going. And if that was the only way to express that sentiment in English, then learning English would be pretty simple. You just memorize that one phrase, and that's it. Anytime someone wants to express that sentiment, you understand them. But in reality, there's so many ways of expressing that one sentiment. I wasn't really in the mood to go. I didn't feel up for going. I didn't have it in me to go. All of these phrases might feel so confusing to somebody who's only ever heard, I don't really feel like going. To somebody who's drilled that phrase multiple times to try to understand what it means, all these phrases seem so foreign. Like, what does it mean to not feel up for something, to not feel up, or to not have something in you? These are completely different ways of expressing the same idea. And this happens to me every single day in Spanish. You think you've heard a sentiment expressed in every single possible way it could be expressed. And then someone talks to you and they say something in a way you've never heard before. And it never ends. So as I've gained more and more experience, I've really solidified in this idea that focusing on specific words and specific phrases is too narrow for language learning. There's just too many words, too many phrases, and too many variations. And this way of thinking about language learning, like you can learn specific phrases and specific words and kind of build your fluency step by step, like a curriculum, comes from traditional language learning, comes from the popular conception of traditional language learning in the media. Because that's what's taught in schools, that's what's taught on apps. You're sold this idea that you can learn a language lesson by lesson in incremental steps until fluency. For instance, when I was in Spanish class, you learn how to introduce yourself, you learn all the colors, you learn how to speak in the present tense. One by one, you're building your fluency. But in my opinion, this way of thinking about language learning is just fundamentally flawed. Language learning doesn't have a curriculum. It's not cumulative. It's very messy. It's very non-linear. And the exercises associated with traditional learning, they're all based on this fundamental misconception that you can learn a language in steps to fluency. So you get exercises like drill and listen to the same sentence over and over again. Put it on a flashcard. And when I first started learning Spanish, that's exactly what I did. I started with traditional language learning. And to me, I didn't feel like I made really any progress until I switched over to a more input-based method, a more exposure-based method. So let's get out of the abstract and make this more concrete. It might surprise you that after 1,000 hours of listening to Spanish, I can look around this room right now and I can see at least 10 things that I can't translate into Spanish. Yet that doesn't stop me from having long, natural conversations in Spanish with native speakers. And here's why, in my opinion. Fluency doesn't mean completion. Fluency means being comfortable with what you care about and having a strong base that when you do encounter new words or new situations, you can quickly incorporate them. Some of the most basic things that you think that you'll learn when you first get into language learning might not actually come to you until much further down the line. The best example of this for me is ordering food. Now, I'm not saying I don't know how to order food in Spanish, but what I am saying is it's not as fluent as you'd think it would be for someone at my level. And the reason is pretty simple. I don't often order food in Spanish. I don't often hear people ordering food in Spanish. Now, if I went to Spain and went out to eat every night, I would quickly build my fluency in ordering food. But I live in Florida. Most of the restaurants I go to, people speak English. And even the Spanish restaurants, a lot of the servers will just see that I'm white and speak English to me. Fluency develops around what you do. The more time you spend listening and doing something, the more fluent you'll be in that area. And I want to clarify something for people who might be asking, are you saying you don't know food vocab? Like you're saying you don't know how to actually string a sentence together to order food in Spanish? That's not what I'm saying. There's a huge difference between consciously knowing a word and having it incorporated into your active vocabulary. I do know how to say lots of things in Spanish, but are they automatic? Are they automatic like when I speak English? When I speak English, I'm not thinking of any of the words I'm saying. They're just kind of spilling out of my mouth. That's acquisition. That means that the words are part of my active vocabulary. That takes a long time. But conscious knowledge of a word, that is something that you could obviously pick up in a few flashcards of effort. So when I say I'm not as fluent ordering food, I'm not saying I can't string together a sentence to order food. What I'm saying is it's not as automatic as you'd think it would be at my level. Those are concrete examples to demonstrate that even when you're fluent in a language, even when you've been using the language and hearing the language for 2 years, there are still things that won't feel automatic. To me, a language is like an ocean, and you can go down to the ocean with a little cup and you can scoop up some water and you can focus your attention on the water inside that cup and you can get intimately familiar with the water inside that cup. But that doesn't mean you've experienced the ocean. To really experience the ocean, you have to get in the ocean, or in language learning terms, you have to expose yourself to massive amounts of natural language in context at a level you understand. The fundamental misunderstanding of people who do the cup in the ocean method, who practice flashcards, who drill specific phrases, is the idea that after enough scoops of water, eventually they'll have covered the entire ocean. But think about how ridiculous that sounds with the ocean metaphor. It's even more ridiculous in terms of language learning. If you adjust your target from fluency meaning completion to fluency meaning comfortability, then your entire understanding of how you're going to learn a language changes. Instead of you thinking that you're going to build piece by piece, one by one, you think, oh, I just need to jump in and absorb as much of this as possible. Because 1 year from now, after listening to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more hours of input in Spanish, I'm going to be more fluent. I'm going to be better at speaking. I'm going to be better at listening. Everything's going to feel more natural to me. But that's not because I'm going around trying to plug holes in my knowledge about Spanish or that I'll have finished learning Spanish. Fluency doesn't come from trying to find things you're bad at and hammering them down, fixing them with drills. Fluency comes from just taking in more and more input about things you care about, things you understand, things you would like to do on a daily basis. If I want to get good at understanding Spanish movies, I watch Spanish movies. If I want to get good at ordering food, I go to a Spanish cafe. It's not about single words, single phrases, single rules. It's about experiencing the language as it comes, experiencing natural language in context. And the things that don't matter to me, maybe I will never learn them, and that's totally fine with me because I don't think of fluency as completion. I think completion is intangible. It's not real. There's no way to ever actually finish a language. In English, I'm sure there's fields and topics that if I discussed them with you and you weren't aware of what they were, you would feel lost. You wouldn't understand. Are you worried about your English fluency? Are you like, oh my God, I'm 99.9999% fluent in English, but if I don't know this specific topic, I'm not fluent, right? That's not how we think of languages. We're not trying to pass exams. We're just trying to understand what we want to understand. Things we don't want to understand, we don't care about. And that's how I feel with Spanish or any other language. So what nobody tells you about speaking a second language is that it never truly ends. But after a while, you stop needing it to. Input-based learning requires input, lots of input. And if you've ever had trouble finding it or tracking it in your target language, check out my website, Lengualytics. It's a curated library of comprehensible input videos submitted by users, where you can search for resources by things like dialect, creator, difficulty, and more. Join a community of input-based learners to support you, encourage you, and compete with you to reach your fluency goals. Find the link in the description.